Have you ever found yourself wondering how certain ideas just, well, see such powerful traction in our political landscape?
Mm,
Or maybe why public discourse often feels less like, a reasoned discussion and more like a really heated argument?
yeah, it's a feeling I think many of us share. It's easy to feel a bit overwhelmed by the way things are talked about today.
Definitely.
But understanding where it all comes from, the history behind it, that can offer some incredible clarity. Sometimes you really do need to look back to understand the present.
Exactly. And that's what we're doing today. Welcome to this unique exploration. We're taking a close look at a really insightful book, Right Moves, the conservative think tank in American political culture since 1945, by the historian Jason Stahl.
It's a fascinating look, really.
It is. And this deep dive aims to uncover some crucial, maybe often overlooked, forces that didn't just change policy formation, but actually reshaped political talk itself in America. And just so you know, you're experiencing a truly dynamic analysis of this book, powered by a two-host AI conversation using Google's NotebookLM.
Yeah, we're going to try and pull back the curtain a bit on how these conservative think tanks went from being, relative outsiders to having such a profound influence on public opinion and ultimately government action.
Okay, so to really get this book, I think it's important to understand a bit about the author, Jason Stahl.
Yeah.
What gives him the authority, the credibility to tackle this?
Well, Stahl is a senior lecturer and a pretty well-established historian at the University of Minnesota. He specializes in American political history. So his academic background, his rigor, it really brings a lot of credibility, what you might call ethos, to Right Moves.
Right.
He's not just listing facts, he's interpreting a really complex evolution. And his reputation gives you confidence that his take is well-researched and carefully thought through, especially since he's digging into this world of think tanks that doesn't always get this kind of deep dive.
And the timing in the book is interesting, too. Right Moves came out in 2016. I mean, that year was obviously a big one in American politics. Lots of polarization, big debates about private money and policymaking. How did that context shape what Stahl was trying to do?
That's a great point. Stahl was definitely responding to what he saw as a critical gap in the history books. You had these conservative think tanks becoming more and more prominent, clearly having a huge impact, right?
Undeniably.
But there wasn't much serious, comprehensive academic work looking at where they came from and how their strategies evolved over time. Most of the writing was maybe too focused on one policy or, frankly, too partisan. It lacked that historical depth.
And you could feel the urgency then, couldn't you? I mean, with American politics shifting rightward, the rise of figures like Donald Trump, understanding how we got to that rhetorical climate felt, essential.
Absolutely paramount, yeah. Stahl wrote this book to fill that gap, basically offering a historical lens to help us make sense of our political present.
So his main goal wasn't just to lay out the history. It sounds like he was trying to persuade us of something bigger.
Exactly. He presents this as the first comprehensive history, arguing that these think tanks were absolutely central, not peripheral, but central in changing both how policy gets made and how we talk about politics.
That's a bold claim.
It is. And it challenges some core assumptions about, objectivity and rigor in public policy. He's suggesting that our very idea of what counts as objective analysis might have been shaped by these institutions.
So he's saying these conservative intellectuals didn't just stumble upon influence. They actively conceived ideas, developed them, and then meticulously sold them.
Sold them, yeah, to lawmakers, but also to the public. And in doing that, he argues, they fundamentally shifted the boundaries of political debate. Moved the goalposts, like you said. That's a really powerful argument for a history book.
Okay, so let's dig into what the book actually explores.
Yeah.
You mentioned the big names, American Enterprise Institute, Heritage Foundation, Cato Institute.
Right. Stahl traces their historical rise, how they went from being relatively small players, almost intellectual outsiders, operating on the fringes, to becoming these major policy powerhouses, really embedded in the political system.
And he lays this out very clearly, doesn't he? Using a kind of structured approach. He talks about 3 stages of development.
Yeah, it's a really useful logical structure. It helps you track their evolution. He divides it into outsider, insurgent, and then hegemonic.
Okay, let's break those down. First, the outsider stage. What did that look like? When was that?
So the outsider stage, that's mostly the post-World War II period up through the 1960s. In this phase, these groups were, smaller, often more academic. They were focused more on long-term intellectual debates, developing an ideology, rather than having an immediate impact on policy.
Laying the groundwork.
Exactly. Publishing scholarly papers, finding and nurturing talent, but not really setting the agenda in Washington or making big headlines. It was more about creating a counter-argument to the dominant liberal ideas of the time.
Okay, then they move into the insurgent phase. That sounds more active.
Definitely. The insurgent phase, he puts that roughly from the late 60s through the Reagan era. This is where they really started gaining momentum. They got much more involved in public debates, directly challenging liberal policies, and strategically building bridges to influence policymakers.
So connecting with the conservative movement that was growing then.
Precisely. This was a time of, you could say, active intellectual combat. They started crafting concrete policy proposals, building networks. They weren't just thinking anymore. They were actively trying to shake things up, disrupt the status quo.
And then the final stage, hegemonic. That sounds like they really arrived.
That's the idea. By the hegemonic stage, say, from the late 80s onwards, Stahl argues these institutions had achieved a kind of dominant position. They were advising presidents, shaping laws. Their ideas were everywhere in the media.
Well,
They'd gone from criticizing policy from the outside to actually defining the terms of the debate from the inside. That three-stage model really clarifies their strategic climb.
one of the most fascinating arguments in the book, I thought, was the shift he talks about in their rhetorical strategies, how they move from focusing on, what do you call it, technocratic rigor,
Yes, technocratic rigor.
to promoting an open marketplace of ideas. What's the difference there, really?
Okay, so technocratic rigor, as Stahl defines it, is basically relying on experts, on data-driven analysis. The idea that policy decisions should ideally be based on the best research, kind of shielded from raw politics. You find the most empirically sound solution.
The best answer based on facts.
Right, whereas the open marketplace of ideas is more like a public competition. Ideologies, policy ideas, they're championed, they're marketed, they're sold to the public, and often persuasiveness and broad appeal become maybe more important than exhaustive data. It's less, what does the research say, and more, what story connects with people.
And he has that striking quote about it. Stahl says, I posit that there was a time not too long ago when there was a certain kind of rigorousness in policy making and policy debate, and that is no longer the case. Conservative think tanks were integral in creating this shift.
In focus, from technocratic analysis to a focus on having an open marketplace of ideas. Yeah, it's a powerful claim about how the very nature of policy debate changed.
Can you give an example? Like, how would that shift look in a real debate?
Sure. Think about environmental regulations. Maybe back in the day, the debate was dominated by scientific reports, agency experts detailing impacts, that sort of thing.
All right, very technical.
Very technical. Stahl argues conservative think tanks help shift that. They started framing it more as, say, individual freedom versus big government, or economic growth versus job-killing rules. They focused on selling these simpler narratives through media, op-eds, public talks, even if the science underneath was complicated or maybe pointed elsewhere.
So it moves from like you said, a wonky white paper to a really punchy talking point.
Exactly. A compelling, accessible message became the priority.
Which really underlines the active role they played. And he hits that point again, doesn't he? He says, what we now know as conservative think tanks emerged in the post-war period as places for theorizing and selling public policies and ideologies to both lawmakers and the public at large.
Mm-hmm. Selling is the key word there. It wasn't passive scholarship, just hoping someone would notice.
It was a deliberate campaign.
A deliberate campaign to shape and spread specific ideas, framed in a way that would resonate, that would be persuasive, simplifying things, crafting narratives, working the media, talking to politicians. It was very strategic.
So how does Stahl actually build this case? I mean, it's a complex argument. You mentioned his tone, analytical, fair, critical, but not hostile. He doesn't just bash these institutions.
No, he doesn't. And that fairness is really crucial to the book's strength, its ethos. He situates them in broader trends, like this embrace of ideological diversity, which actually makes his analysis more convincing, even if you come into it skeptical.
Right. And what about pathos? Does he try to evoke emotion?
Not overtly, no. The tone is scholarly, analytical, but the subject matter itself, how ideas gain power, how discourse is shaped, it naturally evokes a kind of, curiosity, maybe some concern, a sense of urgency even.
Because it affects everyone.
Exactly. And he connects these big institutional shifts to real-world impacts. He touches on how prioritizing certain narratives might have sidelined other kinds of politics, like maybe grassroots movements in the Democratic Party, or how issues like race got framed within this new environment. It's not emotional manipulation, but the implications feel significant.
And rhetorically, he uses some smart techniques. You see a lot of juxtaposition,
Right.
comparing conservative and liberal approaches.
Yes, constantly. He'll contrast how conservative think tanks maybe went for more public-facing, persuasive strategy earlier on, while some liberal groups perhaps stuck with the older, more technocratic model for longer.
And that highlights.
It highlights how different choices led to different outcomes, different levels of influence. It shows where they maybe learned from each other or where their core philosophies really diverged. It helps explain the effectiveness of those right moves he talks about.
He also uses repetition very effectively. Those key phrases, objectivity, ideological diversity, and especially the marketplace of ideas, they keep coming back.
Right. And that's not just being repetitive, it's deliberate. It reinforces the core concepts he's analyzing. By revisiting those terms, he anchors the historical narrative and the conceptual shifts he's describing. It makes these big ideas stick with you as you read. They become the analytical framework.
And he goes beyond just the think tanks themselves, connecting their rise to broader things happening in society, like the decline of technocracy or the rise of identity politics. What does that add?
That adds crucial context. It shows that these think tanks weren't just operating in some isolated bubble. They were both influenced by and influencing these larger shifts in American culture and politics. It makes the story much richer, more grounded.
And he uses rhetorical questions too, doesn't he, to make the reader think.
Yes, he does. He'll pose questions that prompts you, the reader, to step back and think critically about what we mean by political legitimacy or expertise, or what a healthy democratic debate actually looks like. It pulls you into the analysis.
Speaking of diverse ideas and careful consideration, if you're looking for more ways to engage with complex topics like this one, and maybe sharpen your own critical thinking, definitely check out Mindful Moments on our YouTube channel. We offer AI book analysis specifically designed to spark reflection and rational thought.
That's a great suggestion.
Okay, so let's talk about the overall impact of right moves. Did Stahl succeed in what he set out to do?
I'd say absolutely yes. He really did provide the first sustained scholarly history of these institutions. He successfully reframed how we should understand their importance in American political history.
So before this book, their role was kind of known, but not really understood this deeply.
Exactly. It wasn't analyzed with this kind of historical depth or focus on long-term strategy. His work has genuinely influenced how academics, journalists, and informed citizens think about modern policy debates and the forces behind them. It set a new standard, really.
And it's pretty accessible too, right? Not just for academics.
Very much so. The balanced approach, the clear structure, those 3 stages we talked about, make it really useful for a wider audience. The arguments flow logically. Each phase connects clearly to broader changes in politics and culture.
That structure really helps.
It does. He builds the story carefully. You feel like you're following a clear progression, which makes these complex historical shifts much easier to grasp, even if you're not a specialist. He avoids unnecessary jargon, explains terms clearly, it makes his insights accessible.
And ethically, it's noteworthy how he avoids taking cheap shots. He stays focused on the analysis.
Right. He avoids polemics.
Yeah.
He seems genuinely sensitive to the perspectives of the people and institutions he's studying, even while being critical of the outcomes or strategies. He kind of models the nuanced analysis he suggests is often missing from that marketplace of ideas.
He doesn't pick a side. He just unpacks how influence works.
Precisely. It's a rigorous historical account of a powerful force in American politics. And that objective stance, even on charged topics, is a huge part of why the book is so effective and valuable as scholarship. You can engage with the analysis without feeling like you're being pushed towards a specific political view.
So wrapping up this part, Right Moves does more than just tell the history of conservative think tanks. It reveals how they fundamentally reshaped policy debates and maybe even how we see ourselves politically. Stahl's whole approach, his rhetorical strategy, it really persuades you to look again at where today's ideological battles actually came from. It makes you look under the hood, so to speak.
Yeah, it shows that the current landscape wasn't an accident. It was, in many ways, designed, strategically built over decades.
Which leads to a pretty big final thought, doesn't it? If Stahl is right about this shift away from rigorous analysis towards an open marketplace of ideas, what does that mean for us? What's our responsibility as citizens trying to stay informed in sorting through information and trying to contribute constructively?
That's the question that really lingers, isn't it? It definitely invites some ongoing reflection.
And for more chances to grapple with complex ideas like these and hone your critical thinking, do explore Mindful Moments and our other podcasts.
There's always more to explore.
Absolutely. To get an even deeper understanding of this fascinating subject, click the link you see on screen for the in-depth book summary. And please don't forget to subscribe, share this deep dive with others who might find it interesting, and maybe consider purchasing the book via our link. It helps support what we do.
And as always,
Remember to think critically